All right, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. We just talked recently about the film Enemy of the State. His name is Tom Secker, and he co-wrote the book with another of my guests, Matthew Alford. The book was National Security Cinema, the Shocking New Evidence of Government Control in Hollywood, and you can go back and listen to those two interviews that I had. But today he reached out to me, and he did some excellent research, actually a Freedom of Information Act request that he had about the Epstein case. Really still important. If anybody forgets, Epstein died on August 10th, 2019. But Tom did some great work with his group. Their work called The Detail. He can talk more about that and about his research into the case. So Tom Secker, welcome back to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Hey, William. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So for people who may not have heard our last show, you run the Clandestine podcast, the Spy Culture website, but you were working with a team doing some research. And can you talk about how that started and what the Freedom of Information Act turned up?
Sure. So this was a small team that I was running at RT, though we've now left for what should probably be fairly obvious reasons. Although we're still somewhat working together and looking towards trying to launch the Detail as a kind of independent outlet on its own if we can. But essentially, this was a follow-up on a story that the New York Times did sometime I think it was late last summer, where they said they'd got hold of a bunch of files from the Bureau of Prisons on Epstein's brief stay at the MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. He was only there for about 5 weeks. From early July until, as you said, his death on August 10th, 2019. And the New York Times piece obviously went out of its way to try and uphold and underpin the suicide narrative, which hardly anyone actually believes, let's face it. And their story, we felt, was pretty weak. There was a follow-up, I think, a few days later by Vice, who actually published a handful of these documents. But we were wondering, what's in these files? Because they're not making the full set available, and their stories seem to be fairly shallow and simple-minded. So Kit Clarenberg, who co-wrote the 3-part series that we did, he got in touch with the Bureau of Prisons, and we got hold of this massive cache of Bureau of Prisons documents. I mean, I'm not kidding here. It ran to 3,674 pages of material. And when you think he was only there for 5 weeks or something, that's an awful lot of documents. And this contains all kinds of stuff, internal emails, reports on his cellmates, psychological evaluations, medical records, medical reports, all sorts of stuff. And so we dug in. It took a while to try and digest this material and figure out what's here and what isn't. And then we wrote up this 3-parter, looking first at his supposed attempted suicide, which was around July 22nd, 23rd, something like that. His alleged suicide on August 10th, and all of the stuff that was going on in and around all of this, which is a really fairly complex but fascinating story. I mean, you've read the 3-parter.
Yes.
We found some quite surprising stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that people didn't already know about, and there's a lot of stuff that just adds to the suspicion that whatever was going on inside that prison, it wasn't straightforward or legitimate or honest.
Or intentionally obfuscated, right? Or intentionally obfuscated.
Yeah. There was loads of that. So where do you want to start? Should we start with the attempted suicide?
Because the alleged suicide was kind of a blip. People might have forgotten that on July 23rd. He supposedly tried to kill himself, but there was a lot of alternate facts disputing that, right?
Sure. So he's found in his cell, unconscious, in the early hours that morning, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. He's got mysterious marks on his neck. No one could explain what happened. Neither he nor his cellmate could really cast any light on what had gone on here and how he'd got into this condition. He's examined by a doctor about 4 hours later, whose report doesn't conclude an awful lot, and the entire section where Epstein said how he came by the injuries is completely redacted. But evidently Epstein was saying he wasn't suicidal and he didn't attempt suicide. He kept saying this in the days afterwards. He's put on suicide watch for about 24 hours and then taken off it, which is itself a rather bizarre decision. It's sort of, well, if he wasn't suicidal, why did they put him on suicide watch to begin with? And if he was suicidal, why did they only put him on for 24 hours? Anyway, he's subject to this psychological evaluation. This is probably the most in-depth psych eval report in the whole, massive binder of documents. They concluded he wasn't suicidal, and that's why he gets taken off suicide watch and gets put on this sort of lesser psychological evaluation thing.
Right, and so did they said he was chosen he first bunked with this guy Nicholas Tartaglione, right? Who was a former NYPD officer who was in jail for killing 4 guys, right?
Well, allegedly, certainly. That's what he was accused of. Exactly what happened in that case is another strange question. But, I mean, this was one of the things that we tried to find, okay, is that were there other people in the prison who were angry at Epstein? Were there people threatening him? Did he get into any fights or arguments with other prisoners? There's no sign of any of that. If anything, he was, it seems, paying off various prisoners within, various other, people within the prison. I mean, I'm talking about inmates, not officials, including his own cellmates. It seems both of them received money into their commissary accounts from Epstein via his lawyers, which is a little odd, again. But again, like I say, there was no sign of anyone actually in the prison being angry with him or wanting him dead. Certainly not among the other prisoners, let's say.
Right. I mean, but he was complaining. So Epstein's complaining. He also said during the psychological eval that he was future-oriented and he is Jewish and suicide is against his religion, right? So he was telling him that.
Yeah, he even says, I'm a coward. I wouldn't kill myself. I'm frightened of blood. I'm frightened of violence. I'm frightened of all these things. So there's just no way I would kill myself or even could. Now, maybe that's a bit, laying it on a little thick, but there's certainly nothing in any of these evaluations, and he was subject to these quite regularly while he was in the prison, particularly after the supposed suicide attempt. None of them concluded he was suicidal. None of them even concluded he was depressed. He was complaining about the noise and, various health problems he was having, the quality of the food, the normal sort of stuff people complain about when they're in prison. And this is what the New York Times tried to string together as their reasoning for why he killed himself, was that, facing the possibility of maybe life in jail and, in these, fairly miserable conditions that American prisons have, he couldn't hack it anymore, and so he hung himself. And that was essentially the whole story that they put together. But they sort of avoided all of the other stuff that's actually in these files that suggests otherwise. So anyway, the day after his attempted suicide, or alleged attempted suicide, because I'm not convinced he did attempt suicide at all, to be honest, the prison decide to discipline him over this. He gets taken off suicide watch, but they decide to put him through a disciplinary process for, in their words, self-mutilation/tattooing. This is presumably about the marks on his neck. The problem is the incident report that was filed on, him being found in his cell doesn't mention anything about self-mutilation. It just says that it was a suicide attempt, by asphyxiation, or attempted asphyxiation. There's nothing about mutilation. There's nothing about that in the medical reports. There's no mention of it in the psychological evaluations. It isn't until a week later, literally the day of the disciplinary procedure itself, that another email gets sent to the boss, the overall, warden of the prison, saying, oh, here's a new copy of the report, and this time it does include the stuff about self-mutilation. So how is it that for a week, basically no paperwork in that prison, except the stuff saying they were going to discipline him, mentions anything about this self-mutilation? Anyway, so then they put him through the disciplinary procedure. Epstein basically doesn't cooperate. He doesn't say anything. He refuses to talk about it. They call no witnesses. They basically cite no evidence. So they just take this newly written version of the report and uphold it and say it's true and say, we're kicking this upstairs for further action by the bosses. Sometime later, that choice to discipline him, that charge, is expunged. It's removed from his record, but it's not clear if anyone actually told Epstein this or told his lawyers or anyone else this. So what on earth was going on around that? Does that sound to you like a legitimate, a prisoner tried to hang himself and the prison did what they
No,
wanted to do.
no, not at all. It's the opposite. It should be very clear. They wouldn't expunge anything or take anything off. So there's a lot of problems, even with that first preliminary story before he was found dead. And then I think you wrote that the self-mutilation was later stricken from the record after he died too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a classified internal BOP memo. So,
well, I think one of the judges in his case actually raised some questions about this, because when Epstein was in court, he noticed the marks on his neck and sort of raised some queries about this with the marshals and so on. But again, according to both media reports and some of the stuff in these files, Epstein said, no. As far as he was concerned, that had all been cleared up, and that he wasn't. That there was nothing wrong with these marks on his neck, that it was just some sort of weird thing that happened, and that it wasn't a sign of, him losing it or trying to kill himself or anything like that. But whether or not he actually said that to these marshals or not, because this is all reported, second and third hand, we don't actually know. So,
right. Well, it's just, it's just unclear. It's very odd. Yeah. And so then Tartaglione was taken out and they replaced by Efrain Reyes, right? He was there until the day before his death, right?
Yeah. So for the next couple of weeks, maybe a little more than a couple of weeks, it's this new guy, Reyes. And there is actually an extensive report where they went through, because Epstein was moved to the special housing unit because they wanted to keep him away from Gen Pop, and they were actually concerned that, someone's going to have a crack at him or something. It does happen with high-profile prisoners. They're almost always shoved into special housing and kept away from the general prison population.
Right. Which is an acknowledgement that he is a special prisoner, right? So that he's getting special treatment. So it is important, I think.
Bear in mind, throughout this, as the files reveal, both the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice are getting frequent emails from, it seems, random members of the public saying, I'm concerned about Epstein. I'm concerned someone, some upper-class psycho is going to have him whacked while he's in the prison. And it's like, yeah, sure. Like half the country, as soon as Epstein got arrested, was thinking, he's not going to last long in prison, is he?
Right. No, yeah, they know. I didn't think so.
Thinking that, right?
Right. Wow. Yeah.
But it's kind of funny, just reading these emails, and it's like, a week or two later, pretty much exactly what these emails predicted seems to have come true. So yeah, they stick him in there with Reyes for a while, but Reyes himself is mysteriously taken, or is not there, the night of Epstein's death. Exactly why not isn't all that clear. But, they did do this extensive review of the other prisoners in the special housing unit to try and figure out who would make a good cellmate for him. And one of the reasons that they stuck him with the people they did was they thought these people kind of both have pending cases that they're cooperating on. And so they don't have a reason to, get into a fight with him. They might risk any plea deal if they end up getting into a fight with a high-profile prisoner, all of this kind of stuff. So they felt that Epstein would be safer. But there again, that's an indication that the prison knew there was some kind of risk to him, that there was some kind of threat, that Epstein's life was, to some extent, in danger.
Right, good point. So they're aware, but they're treating him strange. And there was one moment there, I think you wrote in that first article, that they were filing files every 15 minutes. So at some point, they were really on the ball watching him, and then something dropped off, right?
That's why he was on suicide watch. Yeah. It was like there was someone going in and checking on him every 15 minutes. But like I say, they took him off suicide watch after about 24 hours. And these notes are incredibly mundane and dull. It's just, Epstein is reading, Epstein is staring out the window, 15 minutes later, whatever. But it does show that if they want to, they can keep a very close eye on a prisoner and make sure that nothing happens to them. And yet, then on the night of his death, that isn't what happens. For some reason, his cellmate isn't there. As widely reported, the camera in the cell and covering the area outside the cell wasn't working, apparently. No one was checking on him. And even though the two guards that were on duty that night, who should have been checking regularly, they should have just been doing, doing a watch, doing a sort of tour of the prison every half an hour and making sure everything was still as it should be. They were filling in false logs all night, saying that they were doing these checks when they weren't.
Right.
They then get into trouble for this. Months later, they actually ultimately got charged with
Yeah, no, they were being prosecuted. Their cases got dropped in December 2021. So
The cases got dropped. I think it was the day or the day after the verdict in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial.
incredible timing. Yeah.
And her verdict came in on December 30th. So that announcement that they weren't pursuing these charges against these prison officers for falsifying records and, it seems, covering up whatever it was that happened to Epstein. The announcement that they wouldn't be pursued for those charges was on December 31st, i.e. a day no one reads the news. Yeah?
Right,
No one reads the news
no.
on New Year's Eve.
Of course not.
It's the best day of the year, probably.
Yeah, they timed it very well. Yeah.
You think that timing is coincidental?
It's not random, that's for sure. No, I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, they were waiting for the right time to drop that they weren't going to prosecute them. But there was the interesting thing that your article points out is those FOIA documents indicate that inside the prison, they weren't coming out with a statement that Epstein committed suicide, but outside of the prison, all the media said it was suicide, right? So they rushed to judgment.
Well, that was the thing. They find him unconscious and apparently not breathing early that morning. It seems he was actually already dead by that point, but so he gets rushed off to hospital. At that point, that's basically all the prison really knows. The hospital then pronounces him dead. They feed that back to the prison officers. But the prisoners start leaking, the prison officers, the people who actually work there, start leaking this to the media. I mean, they also start getting phone calls from journalists because evidently some of the inmates were phoning up people and telling them what happened. This stuff leaks out quickly in a prison. It just does. But there again, the reports, they note that when Epstein's body is found and he's being, wheeled away on the stretcher, on the gurney, into the ambulance, that the other inmates were shouting, "Breathe, Epstein, breathe." They wanted him to stay alive. They were like, it seems, supportive of him. Or you see what I mean? There's no sign of anyone in that prison having strangled him or killed him. If anything, it seems the other inmates actually got on quite well with the man, and found him quite friendly and things. This actually, not to defend him, certainly, of course, but this has actually matched quite a lot of other reports that he wasn't in any way like a sort of aggressive or nasty person in his personality, regardless of, the crimes he committed. That, he was actually kind of a quite easygoing guy, if you know what I mean. So anyway, the prison starts responding to these inquiries from journalists and starts telling them, Epstein's dead. It looks like a suicide. They even send out a statement saying that the FBI were investigating, which is true. The FBI have turned up and they've confiscated a tape. We don't know what's on this tape or which camera it's from or anything like that, but a tape apparently relating to the incident, to whatever happened there. Anyway, so they're telling the media, he's dead, he committed suicide, the FBI is looking into this. They then start getting emails and phone calls from the Department of Justice, the US Marshals Service, the FBI, Epstein's lawyers, and lawyers for Epstein's family members, i.e. the bereaved parties here. And they're all asking, why are you telling stuff to the media before you've told it to us? These emails and phone calls go unanswered for hours. They get more and more angry. They get more and more frustrated with, we're seeing, all these details getting reported all day in the media before you've told any of us. They then sent a statement to Epstein's lawyers and the lawyers representing his family members that deleted the part about the FBI investigating the death. They say basically the same statement, but you can see in their documents the sort of edited versions and where a sentence has been highlighted and then deleted and stuff like this because they're all attached to the emails. They took out that bit. So they're telling the media that the FBI is looking into it, but they're telling his lawyers and his family's lawyers they didn't tell them that. Why not?
Right.
Does that not strike you as horribly suspicious?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, all of the FOIA stuff indicates just deliberate obfuscation and other people telling stuff in denial that they knew. Like there was no ever, to my knowledge, the Department of Justice never acknowledged that publicly that Epstein could be at risk. They never wanted to make a statement like, oh, this is a high value person or anything. They just kept him in there. While the public was like, this guy's going to get whacked. This guy's going to get whacked. And they put him in there I mean, Tartaglione was just he took 4 people into a bar and dismembered them allegedly. That was his crime. You know, it was a drug-related crime.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't even put him in the jail cell with that guy. It's amazing.
Well, that is kind of questionable. I guess with Tartaglione, their reasoning was he was ultimately cooperating in his case, and so, like I say, if he was going to arrange some kind of plea deal, he can put that at risk if he does anything to Epstein. But still, that's
right. Cooperate, but you can interpret cooperating in 2 different ways. Who's he really cooperating with? Is he cooperating with the case, or is he cooperating to make sure Epstein doesn't breathe anymore? I mean, the guy was roided out to like incredible.
Oh, it's enormous.
Enormous.
Yeah.
And it's known to be violent, physically violent. So it's like a whole other story. But so I mean, then yeah.
We'll just go back on that morning. Bear in mind, the prison's briefing this to the media, who are obviously reporting it everywhere, before they'd done any kind of investigation. Bear in mind, they had no photos, no video, no physical evidence from the room, no report had been filed. No one had investigated this incident at all. But the prison just concluded it must be a suicide. Even though, actually, suicide in prison isn't that common. So why did they leap to this conclusion? And why were they so keen to brief this to the media and get that narrative out there before A, they had any evidence for it, and B, were telling anyone from the US Marshal Service, the FBI, the Department of Justice, Epstein's lawyers, or his family's lawyers, all 5 of which had a much greater, bigger right to know that straight away than Vice magazine and the New York Times and whoever else.
Or Daily Beast or something, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Whoever it was, yeah. It's just like, that's who they were liaising with. That's who they were getting back to those emails quickly. But the US Marshals was like getting increasingly angrier and angrier as the day goes on. Like, why on earth aren't you responding to us? Why can't you even tell us basic facts about what's gone on here? And it's a good, fair question. Yeah, I'm actually on their side of this for once.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think that the inclusion in your 3rd article of the Nagel document, the Bureau of Prisons National Suicide Prevention Coordinator, I think that's very telling because he's writing in there. There's stuff missing. I can't possibly make a accurate timeline, confirm subjective reports, establish converging and diverging lines of facts, discover new areas. I mean, he says he can't do it, right?
Yeah. So this is the only investigation that was done from within the Bureau of Prisons itself. I should say the FBI did say, I think this was a congressional hearing of some sort, they said they were investigating the case and they were looking into the possibility that a, quote, criminal enterprise was behind Epstein's death. Whether or not that investigation has gone anywhere, we don't know, because they don't seem to be announcing much about it. There is also a Bureau of Prisons Inspector General investigation and I think a Department of Justice Inspector General investigation, both of which are supposed to be already out by now, but I'm not sure if they've actually come out yet.
They had to wait until the 2 people where the cases were dropped in December, so it should be out sometime. It's I think it was supposed to be out in January of 2022, but
it's supposed to be out already, but I haven't seen them yet. So
that'll be very interesting.
So the only investigation that we have to date that we can actually read through is the one from this National Suicide Prevention Coordinator. This is the office that they, the person that they send in whenever there's a suicide or suspected suicide in a prison to see, did we do anything wrong? Did we miss anything here? Did we miss the warning signs? Could we improve in the future? All of that kind of stuff. Basically, could this have been prevented? So the head of that office, this guy, Nagel, comes in and essentially just talks to a handful of people. I mean, it's not even clear what investigation he really did. It's primarily based. He did what's called a psychological reconstruction of Epstein's time in prison, the last, 5 or 6 weeks while he'd been in the MCC. And essentially from these psychological evaluations and the other records that were released as part of this big batch, he concludes, yes, this was a suicide, and no, there was nothing they really could have done better and couldn't have been prevented and all of this kind of thing. And so the head of the prison, reading the draft of this report, actually sends him an email. And this is one of the most astonishing things I've ever read. And I spend all my time reading government documents. He says, I'm extremely impressed. It's unbelievable that you managed to put together such a thorough report in the absence of witnesses, video, physical evidence.
Right. Right.
Yes, it is unbelievable, isn't it?
Right. I mean, there's two ways to interpret that, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Like cooperating with who? I mean, these guys are like, it's like an inside joke. There's just so many double meanings in some of these words. But yeah, I mean, the fact that the FBI came out and took a videotape, I don't think that was public knowledge until you put it out. Like, I'd never heard that part of the story.
No,
like there's no video because the FBI took it. Like, oh, we don't have video of it. Sorry, there's no video of the night that he committed suicide. But they don't tell the public. Well, the FBI came and took a videotape, right?
Although, what on earth that is on that videotape? Will we ever find out? I mean, it's a bit like videotapes from 9/11 and things like this. It's sort of, we know the tape exists somewhere because there's references to it in documents. But what that tape shows or doesn't show is kind of anyone's guess, really, at this point. But yeah, so this psychological reconstruction done by Nagel, he went through all of these psych evals, and even though, like I said earlier, all of these evaluations basically concluded Epstein isn't even depressed, let alone suicidally depressed. He, in fact, seems in relatively good spirits for someone who's stuck in prison and facing serious charges. But he kept saying, I believe I'm going to beat these charges. I believe I'm going to be able to go back to my, normal life.
Right.
He may be about that, but...
Yeah, he told his lawyers that too. His lawyers made a statement in, I think, some kind of conclusory thing where they wrapped up the case. His lawyers said there was no evidence that he was suicidal or that he didn't think he was going to get out or beat the charges. So that's what his two lawyers who met with him all the time. I think they were meeting with him almost every day. So
yeah, they were. I mean, that's what the records show, is that he spoke to them at least several times a week at any rate. So they kept a close eye on him as well. They saw no sign of a suicidal man either. And you have to think, in Epstein's position, whatever charges he was facing and whatever he may have been convicted of, and it isn't the easiest thing to convict in a case like his, because you are, to some extent, relying on witnesses who are themselves, kind of traumatized by what they've been through. So their accounts usually are a little fuzzy. That's just the nature of traumatized memories and so on. Even if he does get convicted, he can just name names to leverage that. He can just get himself stuck in protective custody or something. The guy had options. The guy could have done any number of things to not face any serious prison time over what he did.
Well, so his attorneys were making the argument that the general agreement from his case in 2008 absolved him and everybody from any other crime, so they couldn't re-prosecute him for anything that happened before that. That was their argument. So they might have had an out. There might have been an out.
Got away on a technicality.
Right.
So yeah, this whole notion that he killed himself because he was facing these terrible charges and facing the rest of his life in prison.
He might have just thought it was going to be a redux of what happened in 2007. He was going to get a slap on the wrist and walk. I don't know.
And let's face it, in his position, that probably he'd have good reason to think that could happen.
Right. But then you can flip it and say the reason these arrests took place is they wanted him in a concealed spot where they could put the zap on him, right? So that could have been another thing. Like, arrest him and we'll get him in the MCC and we know somebody on the inside.
But yeah, in this psychological reconstruction, he took statements from these psych evals and completely ripped them out of context. So the thing about Epstein being a coward, where he says, he even said, I'm a coward, I'm Jewish, which I'm like, if you weren't Jewish, that'd be kind of anti-Semitic, but whatever. He was taking statements like that and using them to show, look, Epstein couldn't face he couldn't come to terms with what he was facing. He couldn't, deal with his future that he was looking at. He even said that he was a coward. Look, he was obviously suicidal. And it's like, that's not what he said. You read that sentence in context in the original document, that's not what he said, and that's not what that means. Like I say, you also have the prison pushing this narrative immediately when they had no evidence for it, no substantiation. You had this National Suicide Prevention Coordinator producing his report based on almost no evidence, and the only evidence he really looked at was psych files that actually said the opposite. And then you have the autopsy, which was fuzzy for a few days and then ultimately concluded suicide. But then a second autopsy was done by a coroner hired by the family, and he concluded the opposite. He said,
Right, Bodden, very famous for forensic medical practitioner, Michael Bodden.
Yeah. And he said, there were the way that the bones were broken in Epstein's neck are actually highly uncommon in hangings, in suicides, and they're much more common when someone in strangulation, when someone was murdered. And it's like, well, I mean, that's how he died. No one's disputing that's how he died. He asphyxiated and the bones in his neck broke. The question is, how did that happen? And it's like, well, would you trust this coroner from inside the prison, given everything else that they were up to, and given that they were pushing this story even before any coroner took a look at Epstein's body? Or are you more inclined to trust a coroner, albeit one hired by the family, and therefore has some motivation to come to a different verdict, but at least explained his logic and said, this is why I came to this alternative verdict?
Right.
I'm more inclined to trust the second one, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I mean, I think Bodden, he'd be risking his reputation to, obfuscate stuff or get it wrong. I mean, he has to back up his findings. So I think, I think it's pretty. I mean, I heard that around here in LA, they were having parties the days before Epstein was found dead because they knew he was going to die. So the info had gotten out that he was going to go down. So I think from a fairly reliable source told me that. So. I think.
It's entirely possible. I've heard that story before, but yeah, I can believe that because clearly Epstein was hooked in with high society. I don't know exactly who on those lists of names and lists of people on the on the flight logs and what have you, who was involved in exactly what. We don't know. Maybe we never will. But it seems impossible that none of them were involved, and it's impossible that none of them knew what was going on. So at the very least, we're looking at a conspiracy of silence. We're looking at complicity to that degree.
Right.
If not some of these people being actively involved in, we know Epstein was doing, it just seems impossible some of them weren't. I just don't know which ones were and which ones weren't. I don't think it's fair to make unsubstantiated or speculative allegations of those sorts at individuals, absent stronger evidence than I have right now. But like I say, in a general categorical sense, some of them must have been involved and a lot of them must have known and kept quiet about it.
Right, and it is interesting that the other guy that was his cellmate died, right? Reyes died later, maybe a year later.
Complications from surgery following a bout of COVID, as I recall, was the cause of death in that case. So he's not saying anything.
Right, and he was interviewed by Barr, supposedly, right? That's what you wrote. So Barr interviewed him for some reason.
Well, yeah. That's the thing. There does seem to have been a Department of Justice and an FBI investigation into what happened here to some extent. Whether that was like a authentic one with any kind of integrity we don't know yet. But certainly, other people were interviewed, other people were asked questions. This is one of the reasons, actually, why the psychological reconstruction basically didn't really draw on any witnesses. It's not just no witnesses were apparently available to exactly what happened, but also they were all kind of prevented from talking to him because they were taking part in the Department of Justice and FBI investigations, so he couldn't talk to them, which is a bit weird. It's like, well, if they're a witness, they should be useful to all of these investigations. No? Well, apparently not. So, but whatever. My point being, if anything comes out of those DOJ and FBI investigations, it's likely to either be a complete whitewash or will be substantially more revelatory than what we've got so far. Because it'll have to be whitewash to avoid all of that. Because they actually spoke to a bunch of people that the guy from the suicide prevention office didn't speak to, and they actually saw some stuff, and it seems to have this videotape, whatever that shows. They've just got more information, so they should. If they don't reveal more, we can confidently say that's a whitewash and a cover-up because they know more. They must know more.
Right. And usually those are very detailed. Those Office of the Inspector General or whatever, those are generally much more thorough. Like they did a whole bunch of stuff about the Russian investigation that was all pretty credible. So if they're the same as that, well, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, Inspector Generals aren't half bad. I find those reports actually quite often worth reading. There's the Special Inspector General on Afghan Reconstruction, who's been publishing reports over the last 13, 14, 15 years on the screwed up policy towards Afghanistan and why it failed so badly. Some of his reports are I don't want to say hilarious. I mean, they are hilarious to read, but they shouldn't be. They are a wonderfully honest and blunt account of just how badly they did almost everything. It was like,
Right.
all of these reports basically saying they got it wrong from start to finish, whether we're talking about intelligence, overall strategy, geopolitics, not understanding the situation on the ground, wasting money, there being no accountability. They just screwed it up completely from start to finish. And it's sort of, if we get an honest Inspector General's report about what happened to Epstein in that prison, I think it's at the very least going to be very, very critical and say that we shouldn't trust these officials and that clearly they've lied about stuff.
Right.
It may go further than that.
Right. I mean, I think it's reflected in these, 3,600 files that you got. I think that there's a lot. It's not clean, clear cut. Everything's very murky. Oh, you did that? Oh, you had nothing to do? Oh, great job. Great job coming up with a suicide conclusion, Oh, the FBI shows up and takes the video? Oh, okay. Well, let's just get to that conclusion. So there's a lot of problems. I mean, how would you recap your FOI request in regards to Epstein?
I mean, it's certainly one of those situations where we've provoked a lot more questions than we've got answers to things. But I also think anyone who reads this three-parter or even has a look at the documents themselves cannot come away from that with any greater faith in the prison system, in what happened there, any greater faith in the official story. All it does is cast further doubt on that. I mean, that's the thing. Like I say, Vice and the New York Times both got hold of at least some of these documents before we did. They had them. And, the New York Times had a team of like 10 people working on this. When you read their article, it's 8 different people's names underneath it.
Wow.
Well, we, in about a week, with 3 of us going through this, found a whole bunch of stuff that they never reported on. So I'm not just saying that kind of chest out and things. I'm just saying the New York Times really isn't very good at this sort of stuff. They had most, if not all, of this information. They didn't report on any of it, either because they didn't spot it or because they didn't think it was important. They came out with a story that reaffirmed what the prison was saying. When we took an honest look at the documents, we came to the opposite conclusion for all the reasons that we've been discussing for the last half hour or so. And so, that would be the big takeaway for me is pretty much everything in there is a reason to not believe the suicide narrative.
Right.
And there's an awful lot in there suggesting that whatever happened, the prison were behaving in a very dodgy and very suspicious and very corrupt way long before August 10th.
Right. Even considering what was the so-called, quote, first suicide attempt, that whole thing. Yeah, totally sketchy. So
what happened there is part of what the prison were up to. In fact, I started wondering when I first was reading about the whole attempted suicide or alleged attempted suicide thing, I was wondering, did they want him to kill himself? Because the way the prison were treating him was like, I don't believe he did. I'm just saying, on the outside chance that he did, it seems that the prison wanted him to. It seems that they did everything they could to make that man.
To make it happen. Like, okay, we've got him. Let's get rid of him. I mean, there's a lot of people who exhale. I've said this in other shows about Epstein, but there's a lot of people who had sighs of relief that when he died, because he took with him a lot of secrets about a lot of men who were traveling to the island. And people from Hollywood all over the place, he was he and Maxwell were totally networked in the culture.
It's kind of similar to the, I don't know if you're familiar with it, with the Jimmy Savile case in this case.
Yes, yeah, very much. Yeah, they just dropped another Jimmy Savile documentary on Netflix, and I'm actually going to have a show with Philip Fairbanks and talk about what's in it and what's not in it. So it's Jimmy Savile, A British Horror Story is the title of it. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't seen the documentary yet. No. I mean, I don't spend, no offense, I don't spend as much time on this sort of case as you because I find it a bit too disturbing. It's not a subject I can devote as much time to as you can, essentially just for emotional reasons more than anything else. It's not that I don't think these things are important. They absolutely are important. It's just, there's only so much dark stuff you can spend your time digging through.
Because Savile was networked too. He knew everybody, right? Royal family,
royal family, you name it.
Yeah.
And Epstein and Maxwell is a similar story. Like I say, they're just plugged into high society. They're just part of this. There are people who will have known Savile and Epstein, won't they?
Right. Right, sure was. I mean, Prince Andrew, right? He knew them both. That's what's one of the strange thing. Like, there are things where he's with the Savile in this documentary. A lot of people who study the Epstein Maxwell see that Andrew, that side of him with those two, but they don't see him with Savile. So he has got strange bedfellows, man. Really weird. So,
for sure.
yeah.
For sure.
Tom, great information. Thanks for doing this research. It definitely gives a lot more clarity about really what happened inside the MCC. I'll put the links to the 3 articles you wrote with your team on the show notes so people can read that. Where's the best place for people? Can you talk about your website, podcast, and what you're working on?
Well, actually, just can I add one more tiny little weird thing?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do.
That we didn't include in the 3-part, just because it's more weird than anything else. One of these medical reports, this was from 2-3 days after the supposed suicide attempt, Epstein went to the doctor complaining that when he woke up that morning, he couldn't control his right hand, that his right hand was simply doing what it wanted, and he couldn't stop it for like 30 seconds to a minute. And that was the point at which I was starting to toy with, just for fun, not seriously, what if he was possessed and strangled himself, out of demonic possession? Or something like that. I sort of started to wonder, is this kind of where they're going with this? I mean,
maybe they were drugging him, maybe they were putting psychedelics in his food. I don't know.
You never know, do you? Because this sort of thing has been done. This sort of thing does happen. So
it has been done. It has been done. Who was the guy? I think it was the Nazi guy who was jailed. It was the third in command of the Nazi party said they were drugging his food, and he kind of went insane and forgot stuff. Like Hess believed that he was totally being drugged, but he was also kind of a lunatic. Yeah. So where's the best place to get your material? And your can you mention your website too?
Sure. I mean, my website is spyculture.com. As we were discussing in our last talk, I mostly focus on government involvement in Hollywood, all the propaganda around high politics and deep politics and the warfare state, the intelligence world, all of that kind of thing. So that's my primary area of focus. I've got fairly big investigations coming up on a whole bunch of things, actually. Just for sort of movie-related stuff, I've got some stuff on the new Top Gun film that's out in 4 or 5 weeks, I think. I've got a big investigation into the relationship between Amazon and the New Zealand government over the new Lord of the Rings series that's out later this year. That's the most expensive TV show of all time. That's a big, that's going to be a big TV event. And trust me, there was a very dodgy, corrupt, and problematic deal that went on there.
Interesting.
And that's Amazon. They're
right.
One of the world's biggest corporations, one of the world's most powerful corporations. So there's a whole bunch of stuff on that coming out over the next few months. And like I say, Kit and I are making some kind of progress on trying to turn the detail into an independent entity, because we want to keep doing these sorts of investigations. We want to keep looking into this sort of stuff because there aren't enough people doing it. So,
Agreed.
Yeah, that's what I did.
I mean, it is interesting that nobody in the States did what you did, as far as I know, an independent kind of analysis of these FOIA documents. So important. So I appreciate you doing it. Again, it's Tom Secker, and the website is spyculture.com. Podcast is Clandestine. So it's Clandestine podcast with Tom Secker. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. All right, stay there.